All right, you guys, welcome to our marriage communication masterclass. I hope everybody's doing well. Uh, so the goal of our time today is for us to get you out of here by about 11 o'clock. So I'm going to be rushing through information. Well, I don't know if I'll rush because um, it's not like we haven't presented this information before and been able to give it to you guys in different kinds of doses. But today, I've tried to, uh, I guess, simplify it and make it a little bit more smooth for you guys so that we can get it to you in just a few days. Um, let's check out our first day and go ahead and get started into it. Okay, so um, how do you ask questions? One is you could send questions through um, my email. That's one. That probably won't come to me as fast as if I'll keep checking it, but it won't come to me as fast as if you drop a comment in. So if you're able to drop a comment in, then in the YouTube format, then I should get it here, um, and then we'll be able to answer it as we go. Okay. All right. So let me just. The microphone is working. Looks good there. And then let me get us our slides up. So the first thing that we're going to discuss is being able to break down the science of our communication. So here's our first day. And then I'll make sure I give you guys breaks to be able to get to what you need to get to. All right, so in this first um, slide here, us being able to um, change over your guys' marriage is a big deal to me, so that you have a different kind of experience altogether. And that's what we're going to be focused on these next couple of hours, is just trying to get you to a different place. And so looking at the science and the master keys to being able to make that change is the whole entire goal. And so we want to be able to impact your personal growth, uh, or we want to be able to realize what the impact of your personal growth is. That when it comes time to marriage communication, a lot of times we think that it's how we are communicating that's creating the difference. It's not how we are communicating. It's what I'm doing on the inside that's really switching things over for me. And so if we can realize that, I think that in itself is already going to be a big time difference maker. The other thing that we're going to do is identify some of the keys that actually can change your communication over. And so what is it going to take to change things over for us in communication? We'll look at that and get you to another page when it comes time to communicating. Okay. All right, so here's some definitions that we need if we are going to be successful. And I think this is important because um, a lot of times we try to go at being successful, but we don't necessarily have what it takes because we've defined things in a way that's not going to be effective for us. So the definition for our marriage communication mastery is it's the ability to share with your partner internal and external experiences that results in a unification of two and the growth of each individual. And there's really not an endpoint to this. So because there's not an endpoint, what we need to know is that things can evolve. We should be growing. It might not be easy at some times. It might be easier at other times. But the important part is we get to the point where we could actually share with our partner any kind of experiences that we have that would bring us together, right? And the more that we can figure that out, what those things are, the better for us. So the next thing that we need to be able to look at is what our purpose is. And so this to me is a sneaky challenge for people because a lot of times us not understanding our purpose gives us this false sense of what our relationship is supposed to be for us. And so our purpose is for us to be able to serve the people around us. And the only way that we do that is if we're able to grow ourselves into a person of awareness and focus on what is going on inside of us. And that in itself will produce the things that will produce the things on the outside based on the things that we've done to improve ourselves on the inside. And so it's super important for us just to be able to look at what we're doing when it comes time to us thinking about, how am I doing my relationship? Like, what's my purpose? And if we understand our purpose, I think, everything's going to change in the way that we'll approach our relationship. Okay. So understand this purpose is a big deal. Serve the people around you by growing yourself into a person of awareness and focus on growing what's on the inside, which will produce for others on the outside. All right, so here is us being able to look at the power of individual change. What kind of effect can you have on your relationship if you are looking at your own motives and own way of doing things? And so there's two communication motives that we have, and I narrow them down to for good or for bad. And the reason I do that is because I think in our relationship, we can really simplify the idea of what's going on in our relationship by saying, like, am I contributing or am I contaminating? So I'm either communicating for good or I'm communicating for bad. It's not, I mean, we don't have to spend a lot of time on like, is it or is it not, or it kind of is. It just is or isn't, right? So it's either good or bad or for bad. So here are the 4 good ideas that you will be communicating with. The for good are the times whenever you're trying to guide and protect your marriage, or when you're attempting to uncover truth and understanding about marriage. And it's not trying to uncover the truth about like what is my partner saying. It's uncovering the truth about what marriage is supposed to be and how it's supposed to feel and how we're supposed to operate in it, right? That's the uncovering the truth. And then also to foster a loving and personal relationship with your partner. So that is a motive that's useful. And then the 4th one is for you to be able to create a marriage culture of integrity and fulfillment. So all 4 of those things are you trying to communicate for good, right? Well, what does it look like whenever we're trying to communicate for bad? What it looks like is that a lot of times we're playing things like codependency and trying to hurry up and get things done and worried about like how things are going now and not necessarily in what we're building. We're trying to satisfy some of the human fears that are natural, like being alone or feeling powerless or inadequate, right? And so in those situations, we're pursuing those situations more than we're pursuing our relationship. We try to avoid things that are hard, and so without thinking about it, we just go to the thing that says, yeah, I don't want to deal with a challenging moment, and so how do I pass on it? And if you find yourself communicating for that reason, it's not going to be goodness. And then another one is that you try to get your partner to behave a certain way, and that always is not a way for us to be in our relationship. I mean, the objective overall is for us to really look at how we're doing things and try to get ourselves to behave a different way. And a lot of times we can't even get that to happen, right? So us just being able to challenge ourselves to look at these two communication motives and figure out where we're at is a big deal, because it helps us to understand some of the influence that we might have on our own relationship. When you think about it, like the communicating for good or for bad, I remember being young and going and trying to put the cheapest gas in, right? And when I think about those cars and the difference in how they run, my current vehicle and the kind of gas, which is premium gas that I put in now, and it runs smooth. And anytime, I think one time there's been an accident where somebody's accidentally put the wrong kind of petrol in my gas tank, and you could definitely feel the difference. And so what you put into it is a huge deal. And I think of our relationships a lot like gardening. And so the way that you take care of and plant and fuel your garden, so to speak, really changes the lifetime of your garden. It changes the quality of what it produces. Everything changes based on what kind of energy you're putting into it. And so it's interesting that you could tell the relationships that are being loved on and the relationships that are not being loved on. You could tell when people are doing things in the relationship that are for good versus doing things in the relationship for bad. And so, and not only can you tell maybe on the outside, but I think in your relationship, the two of you could really feel what are some of the motives and the impacts that each individual is having, because the feel doesn't feel like a quality kind of production. It feels like there's something missing. And so because of that, there's a sense that the relationship is less than. And so it's really important for us to be able to just acknowledge it's a whole lot about what I'm contributing to the relationship. So let's look at some of the common marriage communication mistakes so that we could kind of understand the impact that happens inside of these relationships. And as you go through the list, what I don't want you to do is I want you to pick on yourself. So I don't want you to, or each other, I don't want you to think like, oh, there you are on the list, or oh, there I am, or oh, that's me. Like, it's okay to acknowledge that it's you. What's not okay is for you to beat up on yourself because these are the states. What we need to understand is just that we have a certain amount of control in our relationship to affect its change. And maybe one of these scenarios, and probably one of these scenarios, is leading to some of the hardship that the two of you are having in your relationship and or communication. And so the benefit of us looking at this is not that we point fingers or brutal to ourselves. It's more that we say, okay, that might be an area where I can start recognizing that I do have an impact. And if I impact it in a destructive way, I can impact our relationship in a productive way. And so just being able to get to that understanding is a really big deal. So the first thing that I see frequently is there's unresolved trauma. And a lot of us have that because a lot of times we don't call our traumas. But you'll notice yourself getting hooked and reacting instead of having your relationship interest in mind. And whenever that happens, you can kind of come back to this idea like, oh, Thomas talked about this idea that could be trauma. Well, uh, there are ways to deal with it, and we can talk about this later. But the important piece is that it's that unresolved trauma that causes you to get hooked and react. And next thing you know, you're in an argument. But it was your processes or not processing certain events and challenges in your life that led to some of the communication mistakes that you're having now. Another one is blaming and insulting, which leads to defensiveness in forearms or fists in the air. Have you ever done that in your relationship? Have you ever blame and insulted and make your partner so defensive that they don't want to talk, or create an environment where um, you're not a safe place to really go to and have a conversation, right? And so we're all capable of doing this. We can look at whether or not we're in that situation and try to figure out, is that an impact that I'm having in my relationship? Feeling something different on the inside than what you can communicate causes confusion and leads to not seeing. And so this is an area that might have a little bit to do with some of the unresolved trauma experiences that we've had in our past. But the most important thing is that there's an incongruence. So whatever is going on the inside isn't really what's happening on the outside. So you may be struggling on the inside to really be in a place where you feel connected, and on the outside you might not be saying that. You might be showing something else. And so there's confusion, and then on top of that, there's your partner's not really seeing you because they're seeing what's being presented. And so that creates a huge miscommunication. Okay. And then having a closed mind or hard heart doesn't allow you to see or feel the destruction that you are creating and experiencing. And I don't know if a person who has a closed mind or hard heart could hear the sentence that I just put forward, because most likely this ain't them, right? Like, that's not me. And so the important thing is, if at any point in time you can see this or just kind of hear this out, is that you can't close your mind on certain things. And you're going to see that as we go through this course today. Is I need you to really have an open mind and not harden your heart towards being soft, even when things that are challenging have happened to you or happened in your relationship. And so we have to be able to see the destruction that's going on and the experience that we're creating, versus turning a blind eye to those scenarios or harden our heart to those situations. And then finally, another common thing that helps us to understand some of the impact that we might be having is that your communication could be just harsh. It could be in a way that's filled with punishment and distant, right? So what happens? Well, in those scenarios, it's not like we finish our conversations. A lot of times, we end up actually getting away from the initial conversation and dealing more with how each other are presenting and what it feels like to be having the conversation in a way that's harsh, or what it feels like that there's distance in our communication. And so we end up having, unresolved issues. We hesitate to talk to each other. Somehow we're trying to manipulate each other into doing things differently. And it's just not going well. And so look at these 5 scenarios, and you guys could always go back and rewind the tape, so to speak, and just kind of assess, man, if any of those things are me, I do have an impact in my relationship. And I want you to see that as an advantage and not as a disadvantage. Well, what makes that impact? And I want to talk about the science behind what makes the impact, because you need to understand it's not just something that you're choosing. And if you're not looking at yourself yet and you're just able to look at your partner, it's not something that your partner is choosing. It's more about how things are wired and how we end up communicating by default if we don't take care of it initially. Okay. And so the way we operate as people, there's 2 things I need you to know. One is how we think leads to how we feel, which leads to our behavior. In our case, we're talking specifically in our masterclass about the idea of communication, and so the behavior is the communication. So how we think creates how we feel, which lends to our behavior. And this is important because what you're thinking about creates the feelings that lead to how you're communicating. And so that tells us or gives us a little bit of clue that our thinking and our focus is a really big deal. The second thing that you need to know, and it's kind of along the same lines because they pretty much operate hand in hand without you understanding fully about what left and right brains are, or left and right brains do. There's also the experience of knowing leads to feeling, which leads to behavior. And again, behavior is still the communication part of what we're talking about, but sometimes we know. And what I mean by knowing is you've experienced it at some rate. So you don't actually know um, what's going on in the future, but you knew what went on in the past. And so your body's trying to inform you right now. So what you know creates a feeling, which lends to behavior. And so both scenarios will happen. When we go back to this last scenario here, we talked about the unresolved trauma, but most of these other scenarios come from the same thing. For instance, like the communication with harsh distance or punishment only. Um, when we think about that, a person who is communicating like that is probably defensive because they heard a tone or they saw a behavior, or and somehow like the thing that it's locked into their body is the next route is for them to communicate in a harsh or distant way. And so instead of us thinking of it like um, hey, that person's choosing to be mean or to be rude, it's just not the case. What's really happening is their body knows something, which is creating a feeling, which is creating which is leading to the behavior. And so we need to understand this because communication has a different kind of beginning source than what we initially thought that it has. Like, it's not like I communicated, so then they communicated. There's a lot of communication that's going on that triggers memory, triggers experience. There's a lot of things that starts to hook us. Okay. And so communication has a beginning source of definitions, beliefs, experiences about that kind of event that's happening. And so all you have to do is simply remind your body of a scenario, and the body starts creating that feeling that's going to lead to some kind of behavior. There is a way to undo it, and we'll talk about that as we kind of go on. But here's the most important thing. The most important thing is that what we fill our minds up with creates the communication. And so what am I filling my mind up with? Again, a lot of times we don't know trauma as trauma. We just know it as experiences. And so it's so important for us to experience and create the kind of experiences as much as possible that will lend to behaviors that will grow our relationship instead of grind on our relationship in a way that makes it uncomfortable and a difficult place to be. So here's your first activity that I want you to do. And I'll pause a little bit for you to be able to just kind of write this down and give you like 1 or 2 minutes. Um, I want you to do some reflective journaling. And the first thing that you're going to write about is a recent argument that you had. And then I want you to go back and think about like, how did my individual behavior contribute to raising that scenario up? And so if you could just think about that for a second, I think it's going to be really helpful for us to do that. Okay, let me see if I can set a timer, because if I can, really useful. And we just need, I'll give you 1 minute to do that. All right. So if you didn't finish it, it's fine. You can get back to it later and you can always review. But I think it's important for us to try to at least look at um, growing the idea that we could reflect a little bit. Okay. All right. So here we are at part two. Let's look at um, what the master key to communication is. And the best way that I know how to start showing you is by sharing this video with you. And let me see if I could do this easily or if it's going to be difficult. I think it might be easy. I could do it like this.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes.
So I'd rather not hear the guy talk. So let me go back to the video here and see if we can do that again. So the name of the video is Leadership from a Dancing Guy. But what's important about this, and we're going to get into breaking this down a little bit in a second, but what's important about this is that your um, ability to create influence is a really big deal. And that's the part that I want you guys to know about is like you can have an impact. And in this case, this person, if you watch him the whole way through, like he never says anything to anybody. But what we do know is he's the first one out there dancing, and um, it looks like that. Everybody's kind of hesitant at first, and then I think as things go on, he's able to convince at least one person to come out and dance with him, right? And so as that's happening, he his one turns into a few more. And I think that's kind of interesting because the challenge is, what do I do when it comes time to having influence in my relationship? Like how do I actually change this thing to make sure that my partner will move with me instead of move against me? And to me, what's interesting is you can see that he has a huge impact, because eventually, I mean, tons of people come out and are you know um, actually cooperating with him. And so I love to see this idea, because I mean, if one person could move all these people to get them to start dancing, to me, look at everybody's rushing to do it, and they don't even know why they're doing it at a certain point. Like they're just kind of following. But can you be that impactful in your relationship? Are you able to create that same kind of scenario? And I imagine you probably think that you cannot be, um, but you can be. So I think that it's important for us just to be able to look at this and kind of see the kind of impact that he ends up having in this scenario. All right. So how do we get to that point? And that's kind of the key, is how do we get to that point? Let me turn some of my videos off, 'cause I think I might be confusing my system. Yeah. So here is a um, here's a chart, and it doesn't really look like a key, but it kind of looks like a key. And the key is that I want you guys to know what it takes for us to get to the point of being able to have the same kind of influence, of getting people to move the same kind of way that um, that this person had, right? Like that person was able to move all those people. Well, the way that we're able to do this is by creating frames of focus that help ourselves and other people to move, right? So you'll notice that I have a red column that says work here. And the reason that we work there is because we make conscious frames that help us to create the next subconscious experience. And this is the idea that where I'm saying to you, um, how you think creates how you feel, which creates how you behave. So the conscious part, the thinking part, is really important, because if you can work there to have frames around situations, and you're always going to have an option between positive and negative, if you could work there, the more that you create a positive frame, you start creating ultimately movement around you. And I call it execution, where people are doing the things that need to be done. And for ourselves, and it's probably the best place to start is with yourself, is to be able to do a focus that actually creates ambition for yourself and a sense of power that ends in you being able to do the things. Um, because if you can create a way of you doing it for yourself, then you can create something for the people around you. What's accidentally happening, especially when we're having difficulties in our relationship, a lot of the framing that we're doing has a negative focus. So we're focused on all the things wrong. We're focused on what's going to be wrong. We're focused on what has been wrong. Um, all those things are focuses that we end up having, which leads to, and if you wonder why, like, what makes it, why is my partner acting a certain way, or why am I so worried? It's because of the focus that we're having. And it leads us to a place in our marriage and in our relationships and in our communication that's really powerless, to where we feel like we can't do anything inside of our relationship. And when we get to that place of not being able to, feeling like we can't do anything in our relationship, we do other things, and they're all survival type ways of being. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like all those things are results of us not being able to have the right kind of initial focus when it was a conscious experience or a conscious opportunity. And so we need to be able to shape that experience as much as possible. And the more that we can do that, you'll see ourselves being able to influence the world around us and the people who are closest to us. But if you can't have that frame or focus, nobody's going to come dance with you, right? You'll be dancing alone as long as you are conscious of what other people are thinking, and that it's going to go wrong, and it's not right, and it's not the time, and nobody else is doing it, right? But as soon as you start thinking like, man, I just want to live out the best of my ability and focus on my own growth and do the things that I have to, you'll see your experience turn into a lot of powerful feelings. And I want that for you guys. And I think that us just being able to have that key is such an advantage. So the reason you don't use good communication is because you believe it's not going to work, and that's really important. Everybody knows how to communicate well. The only thing is you think that communicating well is not going to be as useful maybe as the ways um, that you're going about it. And so that is the reason that you won't use good communication. So here's two ways that I want you to use that master key. One is I want you to understand you better. And then two, I want you to understand how you can have an influence inside of your relationship. And so that pairs with our last section that we just talked about for you to see the influence. But imagine if you could switch it over and you could understand how you're doing things. And then you also understand how you can influence or impact your relationship. Big game changer here. That's why we call this the master key to communication. Here's your activity for this scenario, and I'll give you a timer for this as well. So I want you to use the master key. What events are causing you stress in your relationship? What's the frames that you're putting on those events? And then do those frames lead to faith or doubt in your relationship? So we're going back to that master key to understand, like, do those frames that I'm putting on it, do they lead to faith or doubt? And then what interactions are happening in your relationship because of that? So I want you to look at all four of those things in reflection, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to be able to do that. All right. So again, you can go back and watch the tape later if you need to, um, and then continue to do your work there. Okay. So part three, we want to be able to actually make a commitment here in our first section, and so us being able to make a commitment is a big deal. And here's the reason it's a big deal. There's three reasons actually. So one is it gives you a place to focus. If you don't have a commitment, there's nothing that you're going to move towards. And so it's important for us to be able to have a space to actually have to have a landing space. It guides us, right? A foundation to build around besides your feelings or past experiences. So a lot of times you are basing what you're doing on on what you've experienced before, and so you're kind of running from that, or around how you feel in the moment, and so you're kind of doing that thing. And so when you're operating like that, you're only going to get what's already happened instead of getting what's happening later. And that's really important, is that we don't want to constantly live in the future. We might as well have stopped living at that point in time. We want to live or I'm sorry, we don't want to live in the past constantly. We might as well have stopped living. We want to live in the future. We want our future self to be to have good experiences so that we can set up our next future self, right? And we keep growing that scenario as much as possible. And so um, the more that we can focus on a commitment, it gives us that landing spot. And then finally, a battle to replace battling another person. So you got too much time on your hands when you're battling somebody else. A lot of times you're so focused on what somebody else is doing, and you're less focused on what you're doing because you haven't made a commitment. It's going to be enough for you to try to maintain your commitment and to do the commitment. And if you were to just focus on that, you wouldn't have time to be focused on what your partner is or is not doing. You only have time to focus on the commitment that you're making. So here's what's going to keep you from committing to marriage communication mastery. And I already know it. So I just want to be able to share it with you and give you some time to be able to do it differently if possible. So one is you believe that it's your partner. You think that it's not you. And so that's going to keep you from committing because you think you don't have anything to do. Uh, Another thing is you're not sure that it works. And that's always an interesting concept to me to hear somebody say, like, I don't know if it works or not. Um, the truth is it's not about it working. It's only you that works. And so there is no like outcome that you're looking for other than growth for yourself. And so you might not have the right frame of mind, but if you switched over your frame of mind from, is my partner going to start doing what I want them to do if I do this, um, to it's up to me to grow, and no matter what, I benefit because I'm getting better. Everything changes for you. The third thing is your fight or flight kicks in to keep you safe. And so sometimes our fight or flight kicks in, our keep me alive ability on the inside of us starts kicking in. And anytime there's something unfamiliar, it goes off and tries to hold us in the same spot just because we're used to it. And we got to be really conscious of that scenario because that's going to keep you from moving to a different spot in your relationship. You might just get used to arguments, and that might be the way that to operate, or hard relationships, or a relationship that's toxic or doesn't feel good. You just might be used to it, and leaving it is kind of scary. And so I think that's really important for us to be able to look at, but I know that will keep you from really committing. And then you haven't really visualized a relationship you actually want to be a part of. And that's key because we can't move towards something that we haven't seen. And if you can't see that, then it's going to make it super challenging for you to really stick with it. And then it gets hard. And as it gets hard, a lot of times, we want to let go of doing the challenge. And we don't really think about what our future self will experience because of that. And then finally, someone else will win if I decide to actually go through with committing. And if we're measuring the winning idea on, I didn't say something back or I didn't have the final word, then maybe that's true. But if you're really thinking about like, man, I need to create a good relationship and that's my winning, there is no possible way of you committing and having a win or loss scenario at that point in time, because your commitment is the win. Your follow through with the commitment is the win. And it doesn't take anybody else for you to be able to realize that winning scenario. So here is how you guys will be able to commit. And I always talk about in therapy is you need to be able to get in the gym. And I talk about a mental emotional gym. We have the Shine Campus, which is a mental emotional gym. It's supposed to help with relationship and the processes and keep you in a place of constantly moving and growing. And so you being able to find a gym will allow you to continue to grow your being. And to me, um, the more we can do that, the more that we're going to be in the space that we need to be in. As soon as you get out of the gym, atrophy starts to set in, right? So we need to be able to find a gym. There's 5 ways that I think will be really helpful to you being able to actually make a commitment. And one is for you to make a decision. So you got to really cut yourself off from any other possibilities. You have to say, look, I'm going to be married, and not only am I going to be married, I'm going to be in a situation that feels really good, and we're going to create that scenario, and nothing else is going to happen. I also want you to keep your vision in front of you. So often, the day to day can happen, and whatever the grind is or the tiredness of the day is in front of us, and we become more aware of that and have a hard time with whatever's going on in the day, and we lose focus. But if you can keep your vision in front of you constantly, it's going to help you to maintain your commitment. And then build your behaviors out of the vision that you set. And so after you have that vision, if you can do behaviors that reinforce your path to that scenario, then it's going to be easier for you to keep your commitment, because there'll be focused behaviors versus behaviors that are just based on emotions. The fourth thing is for you to be able to work on actually being that will allow you to automate those behaviors as much as possible. And so we're going to go into wisdom and mastery here in a little bit, but the idea is that you have to get to a point where some of those behaviors are automatic, and where it's not always so much thought energy to get to doing those behaviors. And that's going to help you to maintain your commitment. Like, and this might be oversimplifying it, the communication, but you think about brushing your teeth, like that's an automatic thing. You're going to do that. And the long-term goal is that at least is to not have bad breath, right? But long term is to have healthy teeth. And so you make a commitment to that scenario, like I'm definitely not going to have bad breath. And and then the behavior that you've automated is brushing the teeth to be able to get rid of that, right? It could have been popping Tic Tacs, but for a lot of you it's brushing your teeth. So just a small example of like what the idea that we want to try to get to when it comes time to doing our relationship. And then finally, find an accountability partner. It's probably your spouse would be a really good one, but it's not always going to be your spouse. And you need to understand that and know, like, who is in my circle that I can actually um, depend on to talk to, and um, and that will help me bring my relationship up and not necessarily curse it or say that it's not a good thing. So here's the activity that I want you to do, and I'll actually tell you how to do it. I want you to create a commitment statement. And the way that you do a commitment statement is as if you already are. Um, and so if it was something like, for me, it might be, I'm an amazing husband that communicates everything that's in my heart and on my mind, even if it's scary to communicate, right? So that's me saying it as if I already am, whether I am or not. The second thing is use the master's keys to help design. And so we just went over the master's keys to help that would help you to be able to design your commitment statement, and then share daily with your partner. So you can't do the share daily part, but you can make a small commitment statement right now. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do that. Give you two. Let me give you 1 minute to do that, because the rest of it you're going to actually take with you. Okay. All right. So again, you guys can always go back and rewind the tapes and um, and then get to the next and then watch that next or watch those previous slides if you need to go back a little bit. All right. So that's actually the end of our first section here, and what we're looking at is in this first just in this first section, we already covered so much about how you have the ability to actually um, make a change. And we gave you the keys for you to be able to actually do that. And so, what I want you guys to understand is that it's you who has the ability to impact what's going on in your relationship. And it's not just your partner or up to your partner or how we are communicating. I want you to be able to see that it's you and how you're interacting that makes the huge difference. Okay. And so the more that you can realize that, I think, I mean, you're going to see your relationship grow like crazy. And I'm excited for you guys to all have that. All right. So let's get into our next section here. If I can find my slides, you guys get to watch it with me. So I converted, for those of you who have taken the Masterclass before, I converted our Masterclass into from 3 days to just to 2 hours. And so that first part is actually the longest piece there. So we'll be able to all right, just present it. So our part two, and this kind of go over some things that I think are going to be important for you guys to have, um, is the definition that we started out with. So marriage communication mastery. Let's see. Marriage communication mastery is the ability to share internal and external experiences that results in a unification of two and the growth of each individual. So there's no endpoint. So remember, that's our definition, because we really need that if we're going to talk about like what does it look like for us to actually be masters of communication. So what is our purpose? And your purpose is to be able to serve people. This is a big deal. Like, the more that you understand that that's your purpose, to be able to serve in your relationship instead of your relationship being the thing that is serving you, it's a game changer. It is a huge game changer. And so as much as we think a lot of times that it's weak for us to be able to serve people, it's actually a strength. And for us to maybe to help us understand that is strengthening, or service is not about us making people happy. It's just about us being able to help others, to be able to serve somebody. If you think about what the difference is in your relationship, like you being able to serve your partner is you being able to tell the truth, you being able to create security, None of those things may make your partner happy directly. And that isn't the goal, even though it might be an outcome. The goal is for you to create security and connection inside of your relationship. And ultimately, just because those are service scenarios. And so understand that service is not a weakness. And in fact, it is a huge strength for us to be able to do that. Okay. So we did talk about this, and I probably combed over it quickly in the previous section, but communication happens in two different kinds of ways, or in two different kinds of categories, verbal or nonverbal, but it happens in all kinds of ways. And that's really important, is that you're always communicating something. You might not even be meaning to communicate, and the more intentional we are, obviously, the better, but you're always communicating something. And so what are you communicating? And that's going to be a big deal. We discovered in our last section about communication science that you are actually the powerful one. You're the one that makes the difference in your marriage communication. And so how you're doing things can greatly impact and influence. Remember, we watched The Dancing Guy. And so seeing The Dancing Guy lets us know the impact that we can have to get movement happening if we can stick to our own dance, right? And so what we need to understand is that communication, it rarely starts inside the conversation. A lot of people will try to have the conversation, especially when they come into therapy and meet with me at first. They want to try to have the conversation with me. And what I know is that, like, it's not this conversation that even matters. It might matter today, but it's not the overall conversation. There's a whole lot of other things that are going on that need to be established or reestablished in order for things to change. And a lot of times the communication deals more with the seeds that we're planting, with who we're being as people. All right, so for this section here, we're going to talk about mastery and marriage communication. And the question is, like, what does it actually look like in marriage communication? We just went over all the individual pieces, like how you impact your marriage, and how it's going, but what does it look like for you to actually do marriage communication mastery in your marriage? And so we want to define what marriage mastery looks like in marriage communication and outline the path from amateur practices to marriage communication mastery. So in order for us to do that, first we need a definition. So the definition that I want you guys to have is a mastery definition, which is an ability to do something without the use of conscious resources. I got that from Myron Golden. And I like that because I think about, like, tying shoes, and it's nothing for us to tie shoes, right? And that's a mastery scenario. So if we look at if we're a master or an amateur, it doesn't matter what we think we're doing. It's a matter of what we actually are doing that ends up creating that. And there's some key differences between masters and amateurs in relationship communication. And sometimes when we're in the midst of it, we might not know. We might be thinking that we're doing communication and we're really not. Kind of like my picture here, where the guy might think he's doing some fishing, but he's really getting fished. So here's what amateurs doing, which I think is a useful scenario for us to look at, mostly because a lot of times, if we can understand where we are, identify where we are, then we know where we're not. And that distance, we can start working on covering that gap as much as possible. So the first scenario is you communicate what's wrong with others. So these are all amateur ways of communicating. If I communicate what's wrong with others, my focus is off. And not only is my focus off, it makes people put their forearms up, which limits our communication. You inspire fear and anxiety. And again, this is a put forearms up type scenario. But you're not getting people to move on their own basis. So that means when you drop out, either they're going to battle you, or when you drop out, then the things don't stick, right? So if you make somebody love you or show you love based on fear and anxiety, they don't embed that for themselves. And so it never becomes a real experience, right? So it's the same thing with communication. Codependency is a huge deal that I define as victim, perpetrator, and rescuer. And I say that there's three bases basically. And so each time two people play at one time, and each time somebody goes and stands on a base, they get to be that role. So that role that they choose, let's say you say, you know what, I'm going to choose the victim base, right? So if you choose the victim base, your partner is going to go to perpetrator or rescuer. If they decide, you know, I want to go to the victim base, then you're going to go to perpetrator rescuer. We never stand on the same base twice. Okay, so what happens is we just keep going around these bases and we play codependency with our communication. It's an amateur way of communicating because really there's no relationship or connection being formed. Um, Actually, I can't say there's no relationship. There's a relationship being formed. There's no connection that happens. We shut out the conversation of others. So we yell or leave. We don't allow conversation to happen. And again, it's a way of communicating that is avoidant, um, that is demeaning, that's harsh, right? All those things limit the conversation that somebody else will have with us or interaction that they'll have with us. Remember, conversations aren't always happening verbally. Similar to, but not actually the same, is avoiding the other person. So you don't even have the conversation. You're just trying to stay away from even being in those scenarios where you can have a real conversation. So you end up avoiding the other person so that there is no communication that happens, or you limit when you see emotions, you limit what it is that they're expressing, or don't try to be around them. This happens after people have been actually informed or start growing information about how to communicate, right? So they get the skills and the techniques of communication and they start manipulating with them, you know, and that's harsh because I think a lot of times that leads to like gaslighting scenarios. And so you end up misusing communication skills and techniques so that you can get the behaviors that you want, right? And and again, it's just an amateur way. It's not thoughtful for your relationship. And finally, I think that keeping the score. So you have a conversation of, well, you did this when, so it's okay for me to do this, or uh, because you're doing this, I'm going to do this, right? You constantly keeping a score of what has happened just minimizes what's supposed to be going on inside of your relationship. So I like to say there's that gap, and this is what we were talking about earlier, where I think it's useful for us to define what the what the communication, amateur communication is, so that we know what's on the other side of the bridge, even though we can't necessarily get there yet. And we're going to work on getting there together. But what is the other side? And here's the other side that we need to actually get to. One is, if you're a master of communication, you're actually able to communicate as if you're in service mode. You're thinking about, how can I serve my partner, not how can my partner serve me, or what are they doing, right? Another way is you're actually communicating from your vision. So you're making sure that you're thinking about what's going to happen in your relationship and what you're trying to build based on the vision you established in our first part. And then you take a lot of responsibility. And this kind of taking responsibility is not like a taking responsibility for somebody else's emotions. How somebody else feels is up to them. But taking responsibility for your behaviors and your experiences and what you're creating is a huge deal. And it goes a long way for the culture and the relationship. You ask for perspective, guidance, and outside experiences. And so a lot of times it's hard for us to be wrong, or we feel like we're less than if somebody communicates perspectives that don't match the way that we're doing it. But when we're willing to ask for a different kind of perspective and guidance, it grows us. And so that's what makes us a master of marriage communication. And finally, you cultivate unification. And so is your communication really about growing the two of you together versus figuring out a way to get somebody else to move the way that you want them to move? So those are the two sides right there. We talked about the amateur and the master communicator. How do we bridge that gap? That becomes the question, right? And so there's three steps that are going to help you to put that middle part of the bridge together. Okay. And so here's the first one. The first one is you have to grow the ability to serve your partner. And that is something that I think we'll continue to talk about for the rest of our time together today. But you need to be able to grow that. And one way that I think that you'll start seeing that change over is if you could raise your self-talk, that actually shapes the focus of what it is that needs to happen inside of your relationship. And then ultimately, if you can create a certain amount of security and connection in your relationship and communicate with that, you're going to be in a good space. So these 3 steps right here are huge steps, and it's, to me, that's what you need to be able to focus on doing as much as possible. Grow the ability to serve your partner, raise your self-talk up, so that it can shape your focus on what it is that you're doing. And then in your relationship, make sure you're communicating with security and connection as much as matches your being and doing. So that gives you the gapped bridge. I mean, that gives you a way to get to the other side if you can do those 3 things. This bridge is probably too simple. It's probably more like this, all right? A little bit more daunting, not too bad though. So here's the first activity for this section. It's a role play. And so what I want you to do is have a little fun. If your partner is available to you, and if they're right now, then cool, you can use them. If not, just kind of want you to imagine in your mind like what this would look like. And I do want you guys to have fun with it. And so depending on what your relationship culture is like, maybe you don't role play each other, but you role play yourself in a role where you were doing amateur responses. And then I want you to also use your same role to do a master response. And so let me give you a minute to just kind of go over that and complete that really quick. All right, so remember, you could always go and rewind the tapes if you need to. And so let's go on to our next part of this section, part 2. And so developing marriage communication mastery skills. So here's how we do that. Here's the skills that are needed for those steps that I just gave you. So I just gave you those 3 steps that I think will help bridge the gap and move you from being an amateur communicator to a master communicator. And then here's the skills that you'll need to actually do those things. Okay. And so the first one, where you're trying to grow your ability to serve, how do you grow your ability to serve your partner? One is you have to do the internal work that keeps you from getting hooked. I'm going to give you guys something later that's going to help you to get to that place. And then 2, you have to strengthen your vision to see the whole iceberg. So a lot of times you're just looking at one piece. You need to be able to see more of what's going on. So if your partner is yelling at you, you might just see the yelling and be like, that's not an okay thing in our relationship for you to do. You can't yell at me. But seeing the whole scenario of what's going on, you being able to strengthen your vision about that means that you fully understand where they're coming from, right? You understand that it's not just that they are yelling, they're afraid about something. Like there's an insecurity, there's a hardship that they're experiencing. And so we go to wrap our arms around that hardship, not just what's being presented. All right. And then the next thing is allow your partner to love you around your weakness. And so you can't really grow your being if you're not allowing love. If you're not allowing yourself to be loved for whatever reason, it happens different for everybody. But if you're not allowing your partner to love you around your weaknesses or vulnerabilities, um, then you're going to have a hard time growing your communication. And so we need to be able to learn how to allow our partners to do that. The best way to do that is actually to allow it and to go through it. And then the fourth thing is be ready to hold so that your partner can melt. And this is a challenge because so often, whenever our communication and our relationship isn't where it's at, we want to put our forearms up instead of wrapping our arms around each other. And our mindset has to be us being able to hold each other and contain and be able to allow each other to melt in our arms versus stiff arm each other every time somebody comes with a difficult conversation or situation or interaction, right? So those are the four things that you need to be able to develop in order for you to grow your ability to serve your partner. The second thing is for you to raise your self-talk. And this is a doing scenario more than anything. And so awareness and shaping the meaning and the translation that you put on what's being communicated. And so your awareness is one of the sneaky skills that you need to have when it comes time to you being able to have a different kind of self-talk. So if you're going to actually get better at self-talk, about doing your self-talk constantly in a way that's going to be productive for you, then you're going to have to be a lot more aware of and be able to shape what these things are meaning to you. And so you have to get good at that and practice that. The next thing is for you to be able to channel your focus to what your relationship needs for unification and growth. And so we talked earlier about making a commitment statement. So that's going to help you a little bit for this, but your focus needs to constantly move towards that. As soon as you see your focus start to slip on, well, my partner's doing this, and because my partner did that, I'm going to be upset, or I can't believe they're doing this. Instead of you having that focus, you need to be able to channel your focus to what your relationship needs for unification and growth. And so if I see my partner in a place of doing something that might normally actually hook me and make me want to battle or do a fight, instead, it's more about me being able to say, okay, what's needed for me in my focus to be able to actually bring us together, and either I grow or we grow or they grow. Like, what creates that kind of scenario? And then the third thing was that you need to communicate with security and connection. And so in order for you to do this, you have to use frames, and we went over the keys, and that's why the keys were helpful for us to go over first. But you have to use frames that lead to faith and ambition. And a lot of times you're not using frames that lead to health and lead to faith and ambition. You're using frames that are part of what you are afraid of, or what you think is going to happen if you don't say something. You're more worried about those things. And so it's important for us to be able to use the right kind of frames. And then you want to use interactions that invite, encourage, and build. And so what do your interactions look like? Right? Are you constantly minimizing your partner? Are you constantly afraid of different things happening in your relationship? Right? So our interactions actually need to be like invitations more than anything else, right? And then the last skill that I want you to have is to use communication that is full circle. So say how it all happened for you. The example I like to give is the idea that you start out with what maybe you're experiencing, and then you start with how you're doing, and then you end with how you're doing it differently. So it might look something like, hey, right now, whenever you said that to me, the first thing that comes up for me is I really want to try to battle you. But I've been working on myself, and battling you isn't the thing that I want in our relationship. I want us to be able to come together. So I really want to hear better about what it is that you're trying to present to me as much as possible. And so I'm going to keep working on that. And I know I struggle with that, but I want to be here for you. So say to me whatever you need to say to me, however you need to say it, so I can continue to work on those things, and so that you can feel safe in our relationship. right? So that's just an example of you being able to say the full circle about the battle that you're having. You're saying it out loud for two people, mostly for you, but then I think it's also helpful for your relationship and for your partner in your relationship. So here is your activity. I want you guys to do a role play. The reason we do role plays in writing is because that starts embedding things in the body. So it's not an accident. It's not like I'm trying to just get you to do something. This starts embedding things inside of our body. And so the more that you're able to actually write things down or do the next thing, it's going to be super helpful to making these situations stick that we're talking about. So I want you to have a conversation with security and connection, and then I want you to report to each other how it feels. And I want you to repeat this weekly, but I want you to give it a try right now. And if your partner is not available to you, I want you to just imagine the conversation happening and review the conversation for yourself, what it is that you're actually doing. All right. So if you guys weren't able to finish, I hope you had a little bit of fun and just being able to interact with each other. And so a couple of things that I want you to think about whenever you're doing it again next week is use the honest response that you get from each other to really build as much as possible. And then in that conversation, see if you can have a conversation and catch your own self-talk. And so that's something I want you to be able to focus on the next time you guys have that conversation. And then attempt to refocus on what's being communicated. And so that's just a useful practice for you to be able to apply the skills that I want you to have to be able to do the 3 steps that are going to move you from amateur communication to mastery communication. All right, so the last section in this part here is the journey to marriage communication mastery. So let's look at like how you actually get there. And so realize the importance of ongoing practice and commitment to achieve mastery. It's a really big deal for us to understand that there isn't really a stopping point. We have to make sure that we have as much support as possible. We have to incorporate our mistakes. It is what happens when we are building strength. Like we constantly have to push ourselves a little bit more. We experience a little bit of pain or hardship. We got to push through that scenario, and then we get to realize the outcomes of strength building, right? And then develop a partnership around getting better at marriage communication. It doesn't need to be that you're done and that things are that there's a final scenario. Like, you can just always focus on getting better at communicating in your marriage. And for anybody who is going through it, you kind of know, like, yeah, I don't know if there's ever going to be done. We are pretty good, but there's some things that we would like to work on, right? So let's look at 4 levels of communication, where communication from your essence is the goal, and then the fuel for us being able to actually be masters, right? So we're going to do a marriage communication mastery map. So the 4 levels, if we were to start with the bottom level is the tactics of communication. So that's kind of what to say. And if you notice in our masterclass today, I haven't really, not really, I haven't gone over at all. I guess I did go over one tactic of what to say, but those words aren't really for you. It's just more of to give you an idea. But the important part is that we don't focus so much on what to say, because I really believe that what to say comes out of your being. And so then you know a little bit more about what to say if you focus more on your being. Strategies are when and why you say it. So, you know, when do you say thank you? When do you say I forgive you? When do you use an apology? Like, why do you do those things? Those are all things, again, that I feel like come out of our being. And so we spend less time on the strategies and the tactics, and we spend more time on the next two. And so principles of communication are super useful, um, because there are certain laws that will help govern communication. Probably too many to name, but like we looked at the focus factor in our key, and the law that we use in that one is that there's 2 sides to everything. And so what we know is when we go to try to focus on things, just because it looks like it's a bad situation, there's an opportunity for us to actually realize the other side of it, because there's always 2 sides to everything. And so the hardest thing is a lot of times we can't see that second side, and so we're focused on the negative side that's bringing the hardship into our relationship. um, and so with those laws, there's 3 things that I want you to kind of think about. Is one is I have the ability to focus on either side. My focus creates how I feel, and then how I feel leads to how I communicate, and that is aligning with our key, one of our keys that we went over earlier today. And so we need to just know that there's laws that will help govern communication, and that's a higher level of us. If we can look at those laws, it's a higher level of us being able to communicate if we can operate on those instead of our emotion. The ultimate for us is to be able to communicate from our essence, and I'm going to give you guys the how for that. Like, how do I communicate from my essence? And the first thing is that there's words, and then and then I'm going to tell you based on that word how you can do that. And so the first one is unique. You need to understand that that you're going to communicate your way, and it's not a matter of you being stubborn about that and saying like, hey, I got to communicate my way. But you need to understand that you're going to have a different style, and you can be effective with your style. But the way that you're effective is that you operate from your own ability and not try to be somebody else. But you need to know that you're essential for the person who's been assigned to you, meaning your partner is there for you to serve them with who you are. Can you use and be focused on you being able to be yourself in your communication? The more that you're able to do this, and allow your character to shine through, the more effective communication will be. Okay. The second one is truth. And so truth to me happens because you make a promise to yourself, and the promise to yourself that you're going to actually keep is the big deal about this idea of truth. And so you have to make a commitment to you about like, hey, I'm going to commit to myself to communicate in a way that's productive in my relationship. I'm going to commit to communicate what's real for me, and where my process is at, and to getting better at communication. And so us being able to use truth is one of the highest essence of being inside a relationship. And really, there's probably not a limit to how we can spell out what truth actually means in our relationship. But you can know and feel that if truth is what you do um, at your core, then your relationship benefits and it feels really good. And then finally, like, and it seems like an easy word, but the idea of you're communicating for good is important because so often, as much as we might not mean it for bad, we're communicating based on emotion and trying to manipulate and get people to do things a certain way. But we always want our communication to be for good and make sure that we're communicating for good and that our intention is about that. Okay. And so those three things right there all develop a certain kind of higher way of communicating if we can incorporate those things. So it's less to us about being able to say things a certain way. Can you communicate from your essence? All right. So I want you guys to make a map, a marriage communication mastery map. And this you probably won't have time to do today, but you can at least start it. Um, but list some steps or practices for achieving mastery in identified areas. And then as a couple, present the maps and discuss mutual support strategies, ways that you can support each other. So at least this first step, I want you guys to be able to do. I'm going to give you about a minute to list a couple of steps or practices for achieving mastery in the areas that you need to get mastery in. All right. So you guys can continue that later by rewinding the tapes and then kind of go from there. Okay. We are on to our next and our final section here. So let me get you in and out of that really quick. Stuck with me. All right. So the last part of today is we're trying to wrap it all together. And in order to wrap it all together, we need to be able to discuss how we can get the marriage we want through marriage communication mastery. So that's fine that we know how to communicate, and we've already gone over three things, and let's see if we do a little review here. So our objective here is for us to know how mastery in communication leads to desired outcomes in the marriage, and then how to get and maintain advanced mastery, right? So from skill gap to marriage communication mastery, I think it's important for us to realize that we can actually move from where we're at now to being better at our communication. And we've already gone over today the idea of how influential you can be in your relationship. And then we gave keys and steps to you being able to actually get to a different place, to move from being an amateur at communicating to being a master. So today, now with this section, we want to be able to explore the skill gap, which is the difference between where your skills are currently and then where they need to be for achieving marriage goals. So I think, it's important for me to probably share my story with you guys about how we got here or how I got to this place. And I think what's important is that, it wasn't like an overnight scenario for me. It wasn't a situation where I just got good at it, but I actually watched a lot of challenging scenarios go on in relationships and in my lifetime. I watched a lot of divorces. I went through a divorce myself. I went through challenges myself that caused me to do so much digging. Not only that, I've helped tons of different relationships to be successful and to get to a different place that, you're getting all of that information from me. But part of what gets me to this is a whole lot of reps, right? A whole lot of time of being able to explain and understand and a whole lot of digging. But ultimately, the switchover is understanding that I make a huge difference in my relationship and that I have the ability to turn my relationship into goodness. And it's so hard for us to believe that all the time, or to think like that there is actually, a difference that we make. But the truth is that we have the power to influence and make a difference. But oftentimes we're not, right? And so I think that's, it's a huge deal for us to be able to switch that over. Okay. So I want you guys to be able to get, at least from my story, the idea that you can make a difference in your relationship. And it's these things that I'm teaching you that actually will help you to flip over and get those scenarios happening for you. Okay. Let me respond to. All right. Um, so let's keep moving forward. So mastery is being able to complete the task without conscious effort. And so ultimately mastery displays wisdom, and we need to try to figure out, well, what is wisdom then? And so in order for us to figure out what is wisdom, I think us knowing ignorance, knowledge, and understanding is probably useful. So ignorance is us not being able to know truth or have the truth for us, whereas knowledge is us starting to accumulate truth. And so we've kind of done that today, is like you're actually at that point where you're starting to get an understanding of what makes a difference in communication. But assimilation of truth is us actually like starting to feel, okay, these are the things that start working. And it's really hard for us to go from assimilation to application. But application is actually where the wisdom happens, right? So once you're actually using these things, that's whenever it's wisdom, right? So we just might have an understanding, we might leave with the idea, especially if you guys are doing the practices, you might leave with an understanding, but having the wisdom means that you're actually applying it. And we definitely want to stay away from the fool idea. And so the fool idea is somebody who knows what's true. So we learn everything that we've learned today, and then we abandon it, right? And as much as possible, and I think that's where our relationships, even when we've learned the information, start deteriorating, is we take that information that we've learned And then instead of us actually using it, we just say, oh, I'm going to go on to the next thing and keep doing the things that I've been doing in my life, right? So we want to make sure that we're not doing that. Something I need you guys to know is that language is spiritual. And so the highest level of communication was essence, and we talked about that. But the reason that this is important is because we need to know that our words are actually creating something in us and in our relationship and in our partner in a way that we probably can't even see necessarily until it becomes a behavior or an interaction. If you don't realize that language is spiritual, you're going to be doing it wrong, right? If you think language is something that is just another thing that we do, I mean, you're going to operate totally different. So we don't want to take it for granted. We need to understand that we could actually install feelings into each other and make each other have a different kind of experience than what it is that we've been having. And we need to ask ourselves at that point in time, like, are my words killing our relationship, or are they helping our relationship to come alive? And I want to be really particular about how my language is being used. Okay. So I want you to look at your skill gap. And the more that you can look at your skill gap, on a weekly basis, as you go on, maybe on a monthly basis, you are going to know that you're moving in the right direction if your desired outcomes are actually happening inside of your relationship. So list the desired outcomes in your relationship and then rate where you're at, and then identify what the biggest gaps are. Okay. I'm going to give you a minute to do this. Okay, for all these exercises, remember, you guys can go um, and look at them again later. Okay. So visualizing your marriage success, and this, remember today, or in this section here, we're trying to implement or try to figure out, like, how do we move the communication that we're doing to us actually having marriage success. And the hardest thing that I think that happens with couples is you can't really see your marriage success happening, and so it makes it really hard to get there. The only thing you see happening are the things that are crushing your relationship. And so visualizing the successful application of communication mastery in your marriage, and then focusing on the positive impacts, that's the goal of what we want to do in this next section. So I need you to think about 3 different things. And within those 3 things, you can expand it as much as you want. But I want you to think about the kind of culture that you have, right? So the outcomes that come from marriage communication mastery, what kind of culture that we have in our marriage, right? So is it a safe place to be? What does sex look like? Are we strengthening each other? Is it a free place to be? Is there an ultimate feeling that we're committed? Are we growing the family? Are we growing money? What is the marriage culture that you're actually creating? And then what about in hard times? Like, what does it look like whenever things are going difficult? Can we receive things differently and see things. Remember, we talked about the tip of the iceberg scenario, right? Can we experience things differently? How do we apologize and take responsibility in our relationship? What does it actually look like when we are in the world, like as a couple? How does a couple see us? Does it help influence the idea of relationship and marriage in a positive way? Are we a light in the world? So I really need you guys to be able to work on being able to visualize marriage communication mastery outcomes, because the more you can see the outcomes, the more that you'll be able to grow into that. Okay. And the useful activity is for you to draw a right about your vision of a successful relationship as you approach marriage communication mastery. And so see if you could shrink that into one simple sentence so that you guys can say it or share it frequently, right? So an example might be, um, we are a couple that, um, loves and holds each other through all challenges, whether we recognize the challenge or not, right? So just a simple sentence that might summarize what your total vision looks like. So I'm going to have you guys go back and do that after our course is over. You can get back in here and hit pause on that and do that activity together. All right. So here's the action plan for marriage communication mastery. This is kind of how we put everything together and how you'll be able to um, actually implement what we've learned today. Okay. So we need to be able to be moving on the things that we actually talked about. You can't just leave here and then stop. You got to be persistent. You got to be flexible. If you're not persistent and flexible, I promise you there's a lot of things that are going to try to distract you from having the path that you want inside of your relationship. And so to help you, we need to understand that the focus has to shift to assimilation and application, right? That's the wisdom that we talked about. It's the understanding that we discussed. And there needs to be an importance of consistent action, persistence, even whenever things get difficult. So things will get difficult. We need to be persistent. And then no matter what happens in our relationship, can you be flexible, right? You cannot be inside of your mind the idea of like, oh, we were working on a relationship together and you're not doing your part. That's not flexible. Understand that each one of us will be at a different stage, and it's going to change from day to day and person to person, right? And then finally, use your marriage communication mastery map to help you to know what level are you operating at, what skill, strategy, principle, essence are you working on, and then how will you pursue each. And so it's important for us to be able to understand those things. The best way for you to do it is to create a map. And your map does not need to look like this. This is my map that I created for this course. And I think that it gives me my piece. But it starts out with the stick figure is the person I'm loving on and trying to get them to a place of experiencing joy. I have a lot of little markers that I feel like are important to being able to get there. And um, I put pictures to represent those things, but I also put the essence of communication that I really have to work on, of truth and unique and good. And so you'll make your own map to getting to being able to serve each other as much as possible. Um, and I want you to kind of make it your own. Again, it doesn't have to be a map. This is how I work in my mind, but you can have it on a spreadsheet. It doesn't even matter how you do the map. The most important thing is you understand what are my gaps and the places that I need to get to in order to make communication better inside of my relationship and for us to realize a difference in our relationship. So you need to understand that it's an ongoing practice or a process. It's not over today. Like we may be coming to the end of this class today, this masterclass today, and you might have got a ton of information, but you need to understand that setbacks are opportunities for learning and growing. It's not a matter of you thinking like, oh, see, it doesn't work. No, that's your opportunity, right? And then check in constantly with your partner so that you guys can have an environment that's supportive and so you can practice your new skills. Every time there's a setback, I want you to think like, perfect, I get an opportunity to practice what we just were working on, right? and then make adjustments that are specific to your relationship. So, how do you keep closing the gap and maintain security, joy, connection, and structure in your relationship? And to me, this is the big question right here. And I like the idea of a mastermind. And so, I actually have a gift for you guys. But before we do that, you got to do one more activity. And again, you'll do this activity after we shut down here. Okay. And so, one is I want you to update the marriage communication mastery map to include strategies for overcoming potential obstacles. We went over some strategies again. You can rewind the video for that. And then commit to a regular check-in schedule with your partner to discuss progress, setbacks, and support needs. And I think that, the more we're communicating and intentional about those things, we're going to grow. All right. So are you guys ready for our gift? So here's our gift, but I want you to focus on something. I want you to focus on security, joy, connection, and structure inside of your relationship. Those are the 4 pieces that are missing that we need to be able to grow inside of our relationship that just aren't there. But how do we grow them? And what you'll know is that a lot of times we're trying to already grow them. Part of it was you come into this masterclass, but then what will help us to continue to grow those things? Well, I want to give you guys a marriage communication mastermind, and this is what it looks like. It's a 3-month program. There's 2 meetings per month, totaling 6 sessions. The way I'm going to do it is just small groups. So it's like 4 to 6 couples that make sure that it's tight knit, that there's not tons of people that I can't actually communicate with and help. But everybody in there has to be committed to growth and open minds and be respectful of diverse perspectives. And the more that we have that, then that gives us the ability to really grow what it is that we're trying to grow. So we'll meet the first and third Tuesday of every month, and it'll be about 1.5 to 2 hours per session because it will be online, but everybody will have a chance to be able to share and build in those meetings. Okay. So, I think whenever I start going over the pieces, everybody starts thinking about like, okay, what are the pieces of this scenario? But the pieces really don't matter of what it is. The idea that I want you to keep in your mind is, how do I create security, joy, and connection and structure in my relationship? And that's what the masterclass is all about, is being able to serve those ideas in your relationship, being able to grow those senses in your relationship as much as possible. So we'll have monthly themes where we're being able to focus on enhancing your marriage in ways that will be similar to like our communication that we just went over, financial harmony, intimacy, conflict resolution, long-term goal setting. And we'll make sure that we introduce it in the first part of the month. And then the second section is us just being able to look at the progress that we're able to make and share challenges and insights together as much as possible. Okay. Don't get caught up in the way that these are structured. Don't get caught up in what these pieces are. I'm telling you, the biggest, to me, scenario that you can keep your mind frame on is, how do we in our relationship, and what are we willing to do to make sure that we have security, joy, connection, and structure in our relationship? So as the mastermind will go, is that we're going to work on it. The first hour, it'll be like an education component. So me, or if I have an expert speaker come in besides myself, we'll share what's going on. We'll do some shared learning and some discussion. But then in the second hour, we'll actually do the mastermind discussion, where there will be a hot seat. Nobody will be called on without wanting to be, but I suspect that most people in there will continue to be people who want to grow and share and do a mastermind type of interaction. Okay. And then we share our progress, like how we're doing as couples and growing, so that we can help pour into each other. Again, this is not just about me trying to give you the pieces. This is really about me helping you to have an opportunity to have security, joy, connection, and structure in your relationship. And so I'll break down the value for you, but I mean, The only reason why I break it down is because of I think it's necessary because you're gonna have to know how much it costs, right? But the value part is 2,400, and the reason why it's 2,400 is because that amount of sessions as a couple is $200 per session, right? But for taking this masterclass, which this slide needs to be updated because anybody who's just entered, your fee for coming in was actually higher than that. But the founding members of this marriage communication mastermind will pay $743. So that's more than a 50% discount on being able to meet with me a couple times a month and actually get more than just me because you're getting the juice of everybody that's coming in. So I'll make sure I send this opportunity to you guys to be able to take advantage of that. It's a huge deal for you to be able to meet in that. In the past, I've got a question like, what if there's just one of us who joins this round of the mastermind? Well, then you get me one-on-one in those scenarios, which is still a huge benefit. So that's our marriage communication mastermind that I wanted to make sure that I give to you guys before we take off. But you guys, no matter where you start or what you do with this mastermind, you actually have got tons of information that you could be working on to get started. And I hope that your marriage continues to grow, your communication continues to grow, and you get to a place where you guys are feeling connected and joyful inside of your relationship. You guys enjoy your day, and we'll talk to you soon.